Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
All right, everybody, welcome to the show. I'm joined, as usual, by Dan Infalt. Today we got special guest Chris Leppert. Chris, how you doing?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Good. And did I say your name right? Let's start off with that.
You actually did. It's pretty refreshing because most people overcomplicate it and destroy it.
All right, well, we got an exciting show planned for today. And before we get started, Chris, a lot of people probably aren't familiar with you, so give us a brief introduction of who you are, how you got into hunting, and how you ended up becoming a mobile hunter.
Yeah, so like you said, my name's Chris Leppert. I'm from Ohio, and I got into deer hunting back in 1998. The same deer the Rumpala story started, no matter what side of the fence you're on there. I actually lived up in Michigan during that time too, so that was kind of neat. But got into hunting a little bit with a gun, and then transitioned to a bow. Started with a Fred Bear whitetail hunter, the kind that you had to like pull the cables up onto the pulleys to adjust the poundage and all that. It was like almost no let off, but it was what it was. You know, I started off instinctive shooting, and then we discovered the wonderful wrist rocket release, and then carbon arrows started to become pretty popular around that time, and really got kind of heavy into it. I put down bow hunting for a few years, and hopefully I don't get lynched for saying this, but I went to a crossbow for a little while. And then there was just something that kind of sort of ate at me. And I just really wanted to use a bow. And I had buddies that would be like, you don't want to do that harder. And I'm like, well, that's kind of why I do want to do it. And so I picked a bow back up, shot for a few years, started shooting local competitions and stuff and learning that. And then I actually, fast forward a little ways, ended up getting into competition in the IBO, started learning a lot about archery and just how to kind of tweak your diet to obtain better focus and everything. Like, the one thing that's weird with the IBO, well, with any competition archery, but especially 3D in the IBO, is you're trying to hit a bullseye that you can't see with the naked eye. So you're basically guessing where that is, and you're guessing the yardage. You don't have any of that information. And some of them you can see with binos. But so got into competition for a while, and shot for a shop and all that. Created a Facebook page group called Fueled by the Outdoors. And then here we are, basically. I actually ended up meeting one of the Hunting Beast guys back in the day, Joe Rentmeester. He came down to hunt with me in 2019, and we were going to hunt together. And I was going to learn some of this, bed hunting stuff. Well, my little girl had other plans, and she decided to enter the world on November the 1st. So she was a few days early. But been in love with whitetails. I've hunted elk. I'm a turkey fanatic as well. And just absolutely insane about whitetails, especially the last couple years, getting into the mobile hunting and, hunting public land and buck beds and stuff like that. So it's a little bit about me.
Yeah, before we go too much farther, we were kind of joking around before we got on the live here that you went backwards, that you were a private land hunter initially, and then you went and started hunting mobile public land. And also, it sounds like I don't know too many guys that make the switch to crossbow and then go back to regular bow. So Chris, you're doing it all backwards here, which is interesting.
Yeah. So I was blessed. My stepdad growing up, his brother, who I call my Uncle Kenny, he worked on the road crews here for the county, and man, that guy's connected to everybody. I mean, he just knew if you saw a deer or a turkey in the field, he knew who owned it. And I'm not saying I could get permission anywhere, but there were a lot of places I could hunt. and I was very blessed. Well, then for whatever reason, right around that COVID time, man, hunting exploded. And I would watch bucks all summer long and stay way the hell away from them. And then these guys would come in a week before season, 2 weeks before season, cutting four-wheeler lanes, trimming stuff, hanging stands. And I'm like, dang, man, like this is crazy. Like I've hunted public land a little bit and never even seen anybody. I'm going to try that. Well, I got into it. You talk about a struggle. I had also used corn a lot. I used to put down hundreds of pounds of corn, and I'd have these giant bucks I'd send all my buddies, but if you could even try to guess, they were pretty much all at night. And after a while, I'd see these guys hunting on public and being more aggressive and everything, and I'm like, man, we're just going to dive into it, and whatever happens, happens. So I thought, my best bet is to find places that are just extremely difficult to access. And it was kind of funny because I really wouldn't see people there for the longest time. And I'd catch myself kind of cussing and griping, like, what are you doing waking up this early, or, staying out this late, walking this long, kayaking. I do a lot of water access. And this is crazy. And then, looking back, I'm like, those are probably the best spots, because if you're griping, probably everybody else is like, nah, which most of my friends, they don't want anything to do with it. So, but I honestly, from learning to find really good, like, whatever you call them, hub scrapes, primary scrapes, community scrapes, close to bucks beds, it's better than any corn pile I've ever had in my life. I get daytime picks from January through December of bucks hitting scrapes. I'm able to locate their beds and get those like compounding factors, the edge and food sources, and then pressure, of course, which this year's been a big lesson, learning how to dodge pressure and understand that the deer aren't gone. So, to me, public land is just more fun. Now, I'm probably making it sound like it's easy. It's a lot of work, and I think it takes kind of a special crazy to want to deal with it. But it is very rewarding if you're willing to put in the work.
Dan, you got any follow-ups over there?
Nope.
So,
I made him speechless.
yeah, you bamboozled him. So
Yeah.
I want to step back all the way to the beginning. Chris, you mentioned IBO in the beginning, and maybe expand on that. That's not something that we've ever talked about. So maybe one, what is IBO? Two, maybe talk about the class that you shoot and some of the lessons you've learned from that style. And I think that's a great, if you're going to shoot some target archery, that's probably one of the best ones you can do as a bow hunter. So maybe talk about that and some of the lessons you've learned, and maybe even how people could get into that if they're interested.
I would agree. So I shot competition. I started shooting for a local shop, and he wanted me to compete, and I was doing pretty well at the locals. And to kind of help people out that don't understand, like, so in the IBO, you have scoring rings. They're like little lines cut into the foam animals, anywhere from an elk all the way down to, I think our smallest target was a turkey, and then like a bobcat. Those were pretty small. It's all unknown yardage, so you have to judge the yardage. No range finders of any kind, can't walk it off, nothing. You can't even discuss it. I started off in hunter class, and anytime I do something, I take it really, really seriously. And there were a bunch of people on our team that, they'd go down and they're drinking the night before the shoot and just partying it up, staying up late and all that. And I'm like, man, at one point I slept in my car in a little Chevy Cobalt just so I could get some sleep. Really focused on, like I said, tweaking my diet a little bit and drinking a lot of water, because I think I suffer from ADHD a little bit. And so when you're at full draw, trying to, select a yardage and stick with it and make sure that the facial pressure on the string and you're perfectly aligned in your peep and your grip pressure and your release hand and just everything is as perfect as you can to execute a shot. It's very easy to lose your focus for a split second and send it. And man, the word send it is really cool unless you want to compete in archery. It's the opposite. That's the best way to take an 8 or a 5 or a miss and to kind of get people up to speed. So you have an 11, which is your bullseye, your X ring, and then you have your 10, and then you have your 8, and then anywhere else on the animal's a 5, and then if you miss, it's a 0. So you could equate it really easily to golf. Only instead of shooting under, you're shooting over as a goal. So 10 is like par, and an 11 is like a birdie, and then an 8 is like a double bogey, and then a 5 is like you might as well just leave for the most part. So because you're shooting against a lot of people that are really good. The IBO is very difficult. Not only do they make you work by making you judge the yardage and really study the targets, but also the footing is unlike any other organization out there other than those TAC events that they shoot. Footing's very tricky, though. I mean, a lot of the shoots are in the Appalachian Mountains. They're in eastern Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, North Carolina, and you're really, you could draw back and be fighting the side hill with your feet, leaning back and forth, and then having to aim up or down. And that's where you get into like third axis adjustment on your sight. I would have never known this, and this is probably one of my best lessons as a competition archer. If your axis isn't adjusted, or let's say it is, and your bubble is like a quarter of a bubble off, you could miss by inches at just 30, 35 yards. And so if that's not on, and that's when you're aiming, extreme up and down. So that really taught me, like, some of those shots that I didn't make as a bow hunter, I was like, damn, that's why I wounded that deer. It wasn't that, I always wondered. So made a good run though. First year, I finished top 10 in the country, and I ended up not shooting the final leg of the national championship, so that way I wouldn't get kicked out in like 9th place or 10th place, because the top 10 archers get booted to the next class. So you can't sit there and sandbag for 20 years winning a beginner class. So the following year, I partnered up with a guy that I became really close with, and we traveled all the shoots together, shot the same class, shot together a lot. He was really good. He actually beat, I was kind of slated to be more than likely the guy, and I had a lot of equipment issues, but long story short, he would have outshot me anyway. He was a stud. He actually won the individual national championship 2 years in a row, and we as a team won the team national championship. But that second year, I made a pretty big run at Worlds and finished second in the world. So that was kind of cool to shoot against like people from France, South Africa, all over the country, everything. So then I kind of saw it as a really bad ROI, return on investment. You're spending, hundreds of dollars to go shoot, and you might win 150 or something like that. It was a really good experience. Made some great connections, networking and everything, and learned a lot. But I decided if I was going to spend $500 or more a weekend, why wouldn't I do that on deer tags or a turkey tag or something? So I walked away in 2021 and never looked back, and started going all in on like the YouTube channel, podcast. And then as the year I believe it was that we started the expo, and man, things just kind of took off with that, and here we are.
No, I appreciate all the background there. And one last question before we move on from that, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about, and I think you'd do a much better job explaining it than I would. Could you talk a little more about the third axis and the adjustment? Because I think, especially for tree stand hunters, right, you're taking those downward angled shots all the time. So talk about that, and if and how you would adjust that or what you would look at, to make that
Okay.
adjustment on your sight.
So I kind of break it down piece by piece. So everybody's sight, hopefully, and if you're looking to purchase a sight, make sure it has first, second, and third axis adjustment. The first adjustment is the sight bar, where it slides into the little bracket and then connects to your scope, and that basically moves like this. Try to kind of line it up so it'll move like that. So you'll loosen the 2 bolts and go like that and line it up. And they make a little tool. It's the Hamskea axis adjustment tool, and you can basically connect it to your bow, level the bow out so the bubble's perfect, and then adjust your sight to that. And then your second axis, let me make sure I get this right here. So your second axis will be, it'll be where I believe let's see. So you've got the third axis pushes out, and then, so yeah, your second axis is where you'll kind of go like this with your scope. And then your third axis, it'll move like that. And essentially what that is it's making it perfectly level. I believe it's to the earth, like the plane of the earth or whatever. But however that all shakes out, if it's not, then that bubble literally means nothing. It would be like shooting a gun that's not sighted in. And it won't, but here's the thing, it really won't show up until you have a steep upward or downward angle. So you could shoot all day in your backyard and just be dealing left and right. And then you step up in that tree stand, and it gets worse as you add yardage, and then add, angle. So I can't say enough. We actually, last year, we had some guys at the Southern Show down in Chattanooga who explained a lot of those little techie tips, and they're really, really helpful and important. A lot of shoulder shot and gut shot deer, that's why you're hitting them there a lot of times. That or grip. I mean, I could talk for hours about breaking all that stuff down, because the whole time as a competition guy, you're trying to figure out why. It's no different than scouting. Why did I screw up this time? Instead of reading the sign, you're reading your mistakes and talking to buddies and professionals saying, hey, I got this problem. And a buddy told me, good archers find problems and great archers fix them. And I equate that, to scouting, basically. Like, you can get real lazy with it real quick. And I think that's what happens to people with deer hunting.
No, I love that. And you could probably say the same thing about hunters, right? Like, good hunters find bucks and great hunters kill them. So
yeah.
No, I like that. Well, let's transition back to the hunting. You talked about early on, you had some access to some private land. It sounds like some pretty good private land, but maybe smaller pieces. And so I'd like to know, one, what was your motivation to go after public land bucks? And two, from another podcast that I listened to that you were on, you talked about basically like you were kind of humbled, right? When it came to woodsmanship, like, oh, maybe I didn't think I knew as much as I thought I did. And that's something that I think being honest with yourself, super important, right? But you said about it and put the work in. So maybe talk me through and talk Dan through that transition from private land to public land, and how that helped your woodsmanship, and what were you looking at, or what resources were you using to improve there?
So I got to tell this story. So I'm turkey hunting in 2019 with a buddy of mine named Pierce Moore, and we're and my shooting partner Luke, and we're flying through this cedar thicket on our way to basically cut off a gobbler. And Pierce stops, like, we're screaming through this thicket. And he said, this is that buck bedding that Dan Infalt talks about. And I'm like, who the hell's Dan Infalt? What are you talking about? And he starts kind of explaining it to me, and I'm like, and it, like, kind of my idiot arrogance kind of took over. I'm like, I've killed a big deer before. Like, I've killed big deer. I know what I'm doing. So didn't think anything of it. And we went on, and I actually killed that turkey. And later on, I want to say that was the same year that Jake Bush moved to Ohio, and he killed his first big one on public. I thought, man, we got this Dan guy, now this guy, and I start looking into some of the public land guys a little more. And I dabbled, but I thought, I don't know. I don't know if they're really here. Like I'm not sure people, I had permission on a piece of private that butted up to public, and I threw out hundreds of pounds of corn and then sat on the public, thinking if there's something here, he ran a camera, I'm like, if there's something here on the public, it'll come into the corn. Well, I never did get anything over like 110-inch deer. I'm like, okay. So my buddy told me that he had a couple DVDs from this Dan Infalt guy. And so I had this place out in eastern Ohio where I believe Dan has hunted multiple times. And I just couldn't figure the deer out. I'd have giants out there on camera all the time, but couldn't figure them out. So I watched the Hill Country DVD and then the Farmland DVD. And I'm just sitting there like, I think I watched it up in our bedroom. And I'm just sitting there with my brain sitting next to me on the bed, all these light bulbs going off of like everything that ever went wrong or, spooked a deer, didn't have an encounter, messed it up, whatever. And then things that went right. I'm like, oh my God, like this is okay. So I started kind of diving a little deeper and a little more. And I felt like I wasn't doing enough and in the right way. I was walking really far. I remember one particular time I walked my butt off, dude. I think it was like a 40-minute walk. And that's a lot for here. There's access everywhere. So if you're 40 minutes, you're pretty far. And I ran into a guy in a tree stand and I just wanted to cry. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I thought, how the hell did he get in there? He came in by boat. And I was like, all right, well, I got lucky. I swear I'm the luckiest guy in the world. My cousin was a big guy, and he had just bought a new Lifetime Wally World Special kayak, but he was too big for it. So he gave it to me, and that opened up water access. And I ran with that and started finding all the toughest places that people wouldn't go, and then started killing deer. My first year, I put down a Pope and Young buck, which was kind of cool because I ate a buck tag for 2 years here in Ohio. Keeping in mind, I did pass some really good deer on private that were like low 50s, but they were 3-year-olds. And I felt like they would be my ticket to that mega giant. So I killed that Pope and Young after, starting to sell film and eating a buck tag for 2 years. And that felt good. And I kind of got a monkey off my back. And then the following year, which happened to be last year, I killed an even better one, my first sit on public in Ohio. And then I killed one on my 6th sit in Kentucky, out of state in Hill Country with water access. That was a borderline stupid hunt. If you guys want to see an idiot on YouTube, check that one out. But that was scary. And then ended up learning even more this year. And that's what kind of takes us to the deer. If you want to kind of, did I hit all the things that you wanted me to there?
Yeah, I think so. Dan, anything you got to follow up there?
No, that's fine. Sounds good.
Yeah. So Chris, I've actually, you won't be able to see it on your end, but I've got a picture. Actually, I've got a couple pictures. So if you want to start talking about the non-typical and the water access, and I'd be interested to know in that story and some of the other stories too. One thing's apparent, right? If you're doing water access, maybe you can get through some areas that are otherwise too thick, and that's an advantage. But are you looking to like land your kayak at any specific location? Are you using ditches or terrain features? Like, what's kind of like the next level? You're not just kayaking in and jumping up the bank, right? I assume there's a little more thought. So maybe explain how that is. And I'm going to flash some of the pictures of these bucks you talked about while you're explaining that.
You sound like you've killed a couple deer and used access in your day. First and foremost, this, and that kind of segues into this year, which, I got footage. I bought a new camera for our Mobile Hunters Expo to get good media and film our guest speakers and all that, take good pictures and everything so we could market it, the following year. So we didn't have any of that beforehand, and I couldn't do it. I'm a phone guy. When I hunt, I film with my phone, but that doesn't cut it when you want something really nice. So I invested in a camera, and I was just out filming deer, where I hunt and everything. And I thought, I'll go down here and, I get these deer in the viewfinder, what have you, and they look pretty good, but, my viewfinder's like, 1.5 by 2 inches or whatever. So I just know that they look pretty good. And I felt like from about, 350 or so yards, third week of May, I'm seeing headgear, and I'm like, my God, that they look pretty good. Well, I got home and put the footage on the computer and put it in my editing software and blew it up. And I called my father-in-law over. I'm like, look at this deer's head. What in the heck is going on this deer's head? Like, he's got bases and brows, and he's splitting everywhere. So I put out cameras and, ran them on some scrapes and, good travel corridors and stuff. And, man, I had every single buck that I could glass. I had on camera all summer, basically, until about July. And I never did get that deer. But what was funny is the deer were doing something different this year. And I really couldn't figure it out. And this is where I could really, I'm glad, but I could kick myself, because I talked to my buddies and I said, man, I need to go in and scout. Like, these deer, it's different. And I know we had a bumper crop of acorns, but there is just something different. They're not on them this early like that to where it's going to alter things. Well, fast forward to opening day, and I kayak in, and right behind me, flashlights. And they sat like 40, 50 yards away opening morning. And I'm like, oh, God. They had presets in there. Those deer were avoiding their tree stands. They thought that, I talked to them later, and they're like, oh, they weren't coming through because the beans were yellow or whatever he said. And I'm like, nah. I didn't say anything to them. I'm like, they were trying to stay away from you. So that kind of started to get me thinking about the pressure. And I put one more sit in a spot that I'd had an encounter with my current target buck, because the buck I killed, he wasn't even in the equation. I didn't have him. I figured that was just kind of a one and done. For whatever reason, he was there, whatever. I didn't have him. So I put in one more sit, and I didn't see a deer that evening. And I thought, okay. So I kind of drew up a plan and tried to basically look at a map and say, if I was a buck and I still want to go to the private land ag, how could I stay in cover? So I picked a spot on a map, creeped up a secondary ridge, and went up the back side of a tree with a one stick and saddle. And here came, at that point, my number 2 deer, a big, about 140-inch 8, might be 138, he might be 142. Comes right to me, and he was almost strolling like a rut stroll. He wasn't acting like a big, mature buck. In fact, the small buck that came out before him was more leery than he was. He acted like he didn't have a care in the world. And I missed that deer. I misjudged him. And that's tough as a competition archer to admit to, but had perfect footage and everything else, and just flat out shot right under him. And I thought, oh my God. And I'd already struck out in Tennessee and Kentucky. The velvet hunt in Tennessee was tough. And then you've got Kentucky, the place that I normally hunted, kind of got burnt bad. And there were people everywhere. And so it was really tough at first. And then I missed that deer. And God, for about a day, I was pretty down on myself. And I just said, man, if you want to kill a deer and go do this killer stuff that you think you're going to do, you better pull your big boy pants up and get back out there. So rather than put in any more sits, I took a day that my wife actually had off work, and I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna take my stuff with me, but I'll probably be home early. I'm just gonna go scout. I'll more than likely not sit unless I find something really good." And so I start going to places I'd never even been before, and I start at the bottom of this secondary ridge, and I hear deer blowing, and then I pay attention a little more, and there's acorns dropping, and they're just dropping and dropping, and it's raining red oaks, and our red oaks this year were loaded. And I go up in there, and I mean, it looks like, Dan's familiar with hill country. I don't know what you guys have out there, but here we have chestnut oaks, and that's a big late season food source. And if you find, a good chestnut oak flat, or even a ridge, it looks like turkeys came through shredding it, but it is deer. And that's what this looked like. It's some of the better feed sign I'd ever seen. So I keep going up the secondary ridge, and I see a lone beech tree. And, for anybody that's really takes pride in the scouting and everything and reading sign, I kind of knew right away. I kind of froze and was like, oh my God, that is right on the edge of raining oaks, bordering private. Oh my God. And I looked, and there's 3 scrapes under. It's got different level branches and everything. There's signpost rubs. I thought, all right. And just the best way I could describe it is like sort of aggression, violence of the licking branches and the signpost rubs and the gouges from the tines and everything and the little junk on the bases. I just thought, man, this has got to be a good deer. Maybe this is my number one, which I had an encounter with 2 years ago. And then again, opening day when I killed my buck, he came right down in front of me. So I thought maybe this is how he's been avoiding those guys. I put a camera up, and it took about 3 or 4 days, something like that. And I get it's a cell cam, so I got like the notification, and I got a picture, but everything was blurry. So, but you could tell he was a pretty good deer, and he really looked, from what I received, it looked almost identical to my target buck. And then, so I sent like the video request, and it took hours for them to come through. It doesn't happen till it's triggered again, and it's October 15th. So I didn't get anything until like later that afternoon when a deer, squirrel, or something went by. And I looked at it, and I was like, I don't know what's going on with life right now. Like, what in the hell is on my camera? So I sent it to a couple close buddies, and I was like, hey, I'll kill you if you tell anybody about this deer, which they already, they're cool. I was like, I don't know what to say right now. And honestly, I never did put it together until about a week before I killed him that it was that deer that I'd filmed in May. So I got videos of him, and they were only at night. And at that point, I kind of had a decision to make, because I prefer to kill in like a few sits. I mean, who doesn't? But I'd rather be aggressive on a deer that's smaller, and, he's still mature, but he might only be 135, 140 inches or whatever. But I like hunting different states and the adventure, and honestly, the scouting and breaking things down and figuring it out. That's my new obsession, I guess. So, but you don't really see a deer like that very often. I thought, well, that's a pretty special one. Let's go all in on him. We'd had a few times where he'd come on camera all at night, but he's working that scrape like the boss of the kingdom, So I thought, I'm all in. I had plans to go to all these different states and stuff, and thought we're going to wait until we kill him. And sort of the common sense side of things popped into, and was like, he's likely bedding far away. I mean, we're getting 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. picks, nothing even relatively close to daylight. And so, we're all in. I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit close to that scrape, then on down a bench from that scrape, trying to cut him off, and just all these different things. And we're getting into the end of October. And I noticed that the private land people were moving ladder stands in pretty, I mean, it was only like 80, 90 yards from my camera. I'm like, dang, okay. Well, clearly he's not a moron. You know, he's not just going to walk in this open timber with a ladder stand right there. He's probably not going to do it anyway. So we need to be a little more intelligent. So I kind of shifted and ran some cameras in some thicker areas. And one of the things I think, which I probably sound like I'm regurgitating stuff, but everybody talks about edge, but I don't hear as much about people talking about edge in cover. When we think of edge, we think of like, you know, a lake or a river's edge or a field edge. But what I'm starting to find, you know, figure out on my own with a little help from a buddy too, is that if you can find like a hard transition within cover, man, that's like, for me, the ticket. And it ended up being the ticket. I shifted and put a couple cams in that area, again with compounding factors. You got does nearby, you got food dropping and everything, and a good hub system where he can bed. And I was almost sure, you know, it was super thick with honeysuckle. I'm pretty sure nobody's hunting that because most people don't want to deal with going through a honeysuckle thicket. You know, somehow people still use climbers to this day. And so if you're going through honeysuckle with that, it's going to be hell on earth. So I remember, though, finding a good transition edge within cover, and I walked it, and I found another scrape just like that one. And I didn't even put a camera on it. I didn't want anything to do with basically, you know, alerting him that he was being hunted. I've already got a camera on a secondary ridge. I had a camera well out from there, and I had him on it, which was probably, I don't know, 300 yards away from the other one. So I thought, I'm going to not put anything here because I have a feeling that this could be good if it stays open. And this is, you know, the end of October. Well, November 4th rolls around, and I put in a half-day sit trying to cut him off from that other scrape where he could come out of a hub along a bench and then head down into some honeysuckle and just scent check everything with his nose and stay in cover. And it just didn't feel right. So I got down about 12:30, went and got lunch. I was like, man, you got this pressure here. You got pressure down here. Go back and check that scrape. And it, you know, where that scrape was, it's the most unappealing looking place ever, which kind of, you know, rolls into, Dan made a post about this the other day that smacked me in the face. You hear about the first time hunter. Everybody's like, hey, why don't you go sit over there? We'll be over here in the good spots. And then he kills the biggest deer that anybody's seen on the farm. Happened with my little brother. He killed a 195 for his first deer back in 2005. So, and nobody could believe it. Well, again, this spot, super unappealing. And what was cool is I could kayak in, park my kayak, and walk right up a ditch with the thermals, you know, staying down in that ditch. Nothing can see me. Nothing can smell me. And I just shoot right up a tree and wait. And so I walked in there and I checked that scrape, and it was wide open, all different kind of tracks, a pretty big track in it. The buckeye trees were mangled. And I thought, okay, you know, this is probably him. If not, it's a big damn deer making this sign. So I'm going to get up in this 4-pronged tree. And a lot of times I saddle hunt, and that was one of those times where, like, you're not going to face the way you want to face and saddle hunt, you know, and really like feel like you have an advantage. And it was kind of funny. By sheer coincidence, I don't mean to be that guy, but I have my beast stand. I have my beast shirt on, and I got up. I put it 8 feet up. I literally put my stick. I've got a 3-step aider, put my stick up on the tree, set my stand, and got in it. And I sent a video to some of the guys in our team thread. I pulled my jacket open. I was like, I got my beast shirt on. I'm in my beast stand. It's time to go, baby. And I was kind of serious, but kind of joking. And then here a little while later, which I should add, I'm not like super big on, the belief that deer scents are like this magical pill, but I do believe they can be cool for playing defense, like a deer hitting that wind before it hits yours and maybe getting him to stop to smell it or J-hook into it or something before he hits your wind. And I had done that. I had slung deer pee all over, on each side of the scrape just in case. And I think I was in my tree stand for about 30 minutes, and I heard some does. Well, I heard some deer coming off the hillside, and then they go circle around behind me, and they're coming diagonally right down a trail. And I turned around, and I looked, and I see their does, and they kind of acted funny, though. And I didn't put this together until later, but they had caught the wind of that doe estrus. I don't know if you've ever got to witness it, but they don't care for it because they know all hell's about to break loose, basically, and they've already been ran to death. So they just 180'd, walked right back, no blowing, no tails up, nothing. And then about 30 minutes later, I hear, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's November. Here we go. I'm like, God, please, like, I'd seen, some good 3-year-olds and a couple 2s and a bunch of yearlings. And I'm like, God, if you could just make this a good buck just to make this evening, like, doesn't even have to be a shooter, just a good one. And he came, and you could hear him kind of like push those does for a couple steps. And then it was like he just broke right for me. And I stood up, and I'm in honeysuckle pretty thick. I'm in like a line of trees, basically, that's covered in honeysuckle. So I can't shoot 20 yards. And I've got the scrape in front of me at about 15, and then he's coming around behind me. And so I stood up and turned around just in case it was, a good one, or him. And I could see that it was a pretty good buck at about 18 or so yards. So I come to full draw, and then he got closer, and I was like, man, he's got like a real, oh my God, that's him. Like, oh my God, I cannot believe this. Because keep in mind, like, I don't have a daylight anything of this deer. I'm on public land. I can't bait. I don't have, and all you can use is woodsmanship. And I'd used it before, but not quite like this, breaking things down. So, and the other thing, I kind of used some private landish tactics that you hear a lot of the private land guys talk about, where like you're not just going to hunt, you're not diving in unless you have what you need. If I have a deer where I know where he's bedding, sure, but I have no idea where this deer's bedding. I can't access that, get close to it. So I'm basically bouncing around on fringes and food sources, hoping to get lucky, and then kind of diving in to the better spots when, I have, like a good red moon or, whatever. And then, of course, once we get into like that end of October, November. So I couldn't believe, though, like I felt confident, but man, the odds of that deer showing up with all the beautiful food plots and ag and just everything that he had access to, and he comes down to me. And so he stuck his head under a low-hanging branch, and when he picked his head up to get under it the rest of the way, it pointed his nostrils at me and therefore his eyes, and he stopped and was like sort of looking at me. Again, I'm only 8 feet up, and so I put it right on his chest, just inside his shoulder there, thinking I'd catch everything. Well, he had actually turned a little bit after I, checked him out. So I released the arrow at 13 yards, and we did a 0.6 of a mile track, and I'd thought that he had crossed onto private and it was super late. So I'm like, well, if I'm going to get permission, it's not going to be at 2 in the morning. So I'm going to this is going to suck. Like, I'm going to have to try to sleep and then get up tomorrow at a reasonable time and show up with a box of donuts and a bottle of bourbon and say, hey, can I please go recover my deer? I was pretty sure of what I had hit, though, and I will dive into that just a tad. I don't want to keep you guys too long or bore you, but essentially that deer ran like 70 yards and then turned around and blew at me. And I couldn't believe it, but I'd heard of it one other time. My buddy shot one just inside the armpit, never entered the cavity, and the deer blew at him, stomped, ran away. We ran that deer for miles and finally ran him down and put him down. And I am dead serious when I say miles. So I'm thinking I've got like a 7, 8, 9 mile day ahead of me the next day. And I had done the same thing. I had blood that Stevie Wonder could jog the blood trail of. Like, it was bleeding good, but he just wasn't ready to die. Well, I showed up the next day, kayaking up and down the bank, looking for where that deer hit the bank, and I never found it. And so I looked out in some reeds that were in the middle of the water, and I found the bed with blood in it. And then there was like this patch of weeds, like I guess you'd say downstream, and the blood led to it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go around and come up, from downstream, to me downwind, because I'm always following the way the water flows with the thermals and everything. And there he was, bedded down. He had basically, on his belly, wasn't laying on his side, on his belly, nose in the dirt. He went to sleep and never woke up. So recovered him, kayaked him out, and here I am talking to Dan Infalt on a podcast about it. He ended up going 172 as a 14-pointer at 8.5 and 7.5 inch bases. Was a really, really cool deer. 4 main beams. Just a really cool deer and really cool experience. And I kind of hate it for the guy that kills like that 135-inch 8 that's 5 years old, because like I don't feel like I'm anybody better than he is. It's still a mature buck on pressured public land. It just, this deer happened to get more attention, but super cool the way it played out.
No, that's an awesome story and a lot of takeaways there for me. Dan, I'll give you, you've been pretty quiet over there. You got anything you want to say?
Pretty cool that you're using the beast stand.
Yeah, I was pretty.
Guy that runs the mobile shows is using the beast stand. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I pride myself on trying to use just about everything in the toolbox, and I run into a lot of guys that get hung up on like one thing or whatever, and I like to use a lot, and I'm a firm believer that there's situations that call for certain things, and this year I had actually been using my stands a lot just because I had some knee and ankle issues where sitting in the saddle was super uncomfortable. And I love sitting in the saddle, but this year it wasn't working out. So I was using my Elevate and my Beast stand a lot. And I'd put one up in a tree that I felt like was a good location and leave it, and then take my other one and go over here and then, leave it. And then finally I just started carrying that damn Beast stand everywhere I went, because I've got a bow holder, like the little prong bow holder attached to the bottom of it. So my bow's right at my side. And I can't believe I killed a freaking booner at 8 feet off the ground. It's great.
One takeaway from that is, for me, is I was smiling when you were talking about how you're in that tree and you couldn't believe that thing came in daylight, and what are the odds with all the food plots and everything else. And I'd say the odds are pretty high, personally. And the thing is those bucks are moving where the people aren't hunting. And that's how they get that big. A buck that big, if he's hopping into food plots and stuff, he's on cameras, he's getting killed.
Yeah. Amen.
So really, when you're hopping around out there, you don't realize it, but just that buck living there puts your odds pretty high of running across it in daylight. and it's probably going to be someplace where you haven't had a camera yet, where you haven't hunted yet. And I think that's when those things fall together. I mean, you look at all the big bucks I've taken over the years. The majority of good deer, like the 2 and 3 year olds that got real nice racks, I've shot the majority of those in spots I've hunted before, a second day hunt. Maybe I've hunted it 3 times that season. But without a doubt, 90% of the ones that get over that 5-year-old age, 90% of them are the very first time I've ever in an area that I kill them.
Yeah.
The first time in that tree. And I think that hopping around thing, you know, when you went in there and killed that deer, I know exactly what you're thinking about you know, what are the odds of that thing coming in? But really, that experience you had, you almost need that to grow as a hunter, because now you know that it can happen. You believe in yourself. And that's part of that. You really get kind of a cockiness when it works. And you know, it's going to work even more because you believe in it. Because if you go out there and you half believe in it, you're going to go out there and go, well, I'm just going to scout a little. Maybe I'll go home after scouting or whatever. And you don't end up sitting someplace. You don't end up trying something. And you certainly won't go try some spot that don't got a lot of sign. Maybe it's just got a scrape or something, because you don't have that belief in that spot will work.
Yeah.
So that was my biggest takeaway out of that kind of.
It really is kind of interesting too, because I think, you know, being a private land guy, all you hear is, you know, if you bump deer, your life is over. You might as well dig a hole and crawl into the ground. He's never coming back. And I think it can hurt on private. And that's what sucks about private land is if you got a property line that's 200 yards over, or what, or 50 yards or whatever, well, yeah, then he is gone. But just because you bumped him or he's avoiding somebody doesn't necessarily mean he's moving far. And that first buck that I missed, they were not far. I'm not going to say it on here, but afterwards I'll tell you the full story. And I mean, it's like things that you've experienced a million times over. But it is kind of interesting because it's very difficult to describe to somebody until you feel the feeling. But when you know, and you don't know until you do. And then when you do, you're like, oh God, get in a tree now. Get up a tree. Here we go. And then he came in, you know, and you believe, but, and then he shows up and you're like, oh my God, it worked. Like there he is. So it's very interesting to me how they work, and what you have to say really makes sense. You know, if he's out in those food plots and exposing himself, I mean, just by the laws of probability, you know, smart or not, he's got a lot better chance of getting killed. And so you start getting in those overlooked pockets and stuff where it's thick and they can move around in daylight and nothing can see them. Bam. And
I was just having a talk with my son about that. He was bow hunting during our gun season, trying to get a second bow buck in Wisconsin, using his gun tag with a bow. And he was getting frustrated because he wasn't seeing a lot. And I was giving him some pointers. He kind of wanted to do it himself, but I'd give him like an area to concentrate on. And he said, I'm having a hard time figuring out why I was picking such bizarre areas. And I told him that, well, that's where nobody's going, kind of thing. And I said, and he said, well, I'm not seeing as many deer as my friends are. I'm like, are you hunting deer or are you hunting a big buck? And basically what it comes down to is what really made sense to him where I got it through was he had, during the rut, he was tagged out. So he was walking around with his bow squirrel hunting. And he just loves hunting, you know?
yeah.
So I said, when you were squirrel hunting with the bow and you're walking around during rut, how often did you run into some bow hunter that got a little ticked at you? Because I had known he had quit doing the hunt because the people were getting ticked at him. You know what I mean? So he said, well, you know, probably, you know, every, you know, half hour I ran into a guy in a tree. He says he couldn't hardly walk 300-400 yards without running into a guy in a tree and rut. And I says, and yet this is where I'm shooting all these big bucks. How are they walking through this woods and not getting shot? And that's the way you got to look at it.
Yeah.
If a deer gets to be 5 or 6 years old in an environment like this where they're getting hunted, they're finding some niche where people don't go, and they literally understand the whole hunting network. Because if they didn't, they would just walk out into those areas and get shot. It ain't
Yep.
luck. I mean, a 2-year-old or a 1.5-year-old is most likely going to get shot during rut. And the ones that survive and make it to 3 learn a lot of valuable life lessons. They usually get an arrow or 2 in them around here.
Oh yeah.
And if they make it to that 3, the chances of making it to 4 are even harder. But once they make it to 4, they generally succumb to a truck sometime at 5, 6 years old,
Right.
7 years old. The biggest bucks I know of out here that have gotten killed, I've hunted for years, and they'd end up getting hit by a truck, or they'd get, or they just end up disappearing where they died and you don't know how, but nobody ever shot them.
Yep.
But they find that niche, and that's the biggest piece of the puzzle people can't get. Funny fact is, I was mobile hunting back in the early 80s, and hunting bedding areas, and people couldn't understand that at all. I didn't have anybody on my side. People were like, you do not go near bedding areas. You don't walk around. You pick a spot. You just keep going back, and sooner or later that deer will walk by. And that used to be the mentality. And it's kind of fun to watch that whole thing change around to now, basically anybody that's got any common sense that's hunting public is hunting mobile, is moving around, is, doing it, and it's just kind of cool.
Yeah.
You didn't get a chance to talk to us about your mobile show. Why don't you tell everybody that's not aware of it what you got going on, where those are at, and what they're about? Because I went to that the Northern show last winter, and that was a hell of a show. I mean, it was all people that were like-minded like us. It was a mobile group, so it was a smaller group. It wasn't like going to the some giant deer show, but you didn't have to put up with the deer farmer guys. You didn't the food plot guys and stuff.
Yes.
It was mobile hunting guys. The whole thing was, and it was cool because you look around, a lot of people. And it's like shows used to be when you'd go down there and you'd recognize people from the industry and stuff. I mean, it was a pretty fun event. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate the kind words, man. I actually kind of nicknamed it the Killer's Ball because I don't know that there's anywhere. To me, this sounds judgmental, but to me, I don't know of a place where you can go and find that many legit killers that can go out on public and get it done under one roof. It's insane. But we started a few years ago in a little barn building. Kind of started as like a meetup, and then everybody liked it, thought we should do it bigger. So we made it bigger, stayed in Ohio. We doubled in size, had a bunch of vendors, and then this year was the year that I thought, well, if we're going to make this thing, what we think it could be, we're going to have to get some big boy buildings. So we went to Kalamazoo and Chattanooga, Tennessee, and got some convention center buildings, and talk about a scary leap that is. Got those and had some absolutely phenomenal shows. Amazing guys down south, Mike Perry, to name a few, Jonathan Moreland, and then of course, we come to the north, and you got to have Dan Infalt. Like, you can't not, like, the whole time I remember talking to you, I'm like, please don't tell me no. I'm going to cry in front of you if you tell me no. And when he said yes, I got all shaky, and I think I said something stupid and hung up the phone, and then when I was like, Dan's in. So, but we had a blast. Andy May was there. We had Dan. We had, who else did we have? Garrett Prawl. And then who else did we have as guest speakers there? We did, help me out, Dan. Hopefully you have a better memory than me. God bless it. I'm trying to think who it was. Regardless, we had Sam Ubble.
Sam Ubble. Yeah.
Yeah, and Dieter Cocken. So we had some amazing conversation, and probably, for me, and again, I don't, me and my buddy joke, call them carrot tuggers, guys that say things, just to get brownie points. But the moment of the show year for me, I got a text from a guy named Greg Staggs. He's really big in one sticking. I was helping somebody. He's like, hey, you might want to get your drone and get up here. Said, wait till you see this. And Dan and Mario had sat down and started speaking. And it was like, the way I equate it, it was like the elders sat down and the whole rest of the damn tribe needed to hear what they had to say. And it was just a really cool moment. So we plucked the drone into the air and got some really good footage of that and took pics and everything. But
I went and did the Big Show Network with the Field and Stream guys.
Yeah.
I only did 2 of their shows. I wasn't going to do all 4 because they were right in a row, one week after another. But they had me do seminars, and they said my seminars were the biggest seminars they had.
Really?
And I didn't. And out of them shows, I mean, those shows were packed with thousands and thousands of people. I didn't have a quarter of the people that came to the seminar when I talked at your show.
Wow.
Because all like-minded people.
Yeah.
So that's what made that show. I mean, at first, when we talked, I know I was a little apprehensive about going. I was like,
sure.
Show,
Yeah.
But once I went and I saw what it was about and stuff, I'm sure glad I didn't blow you off, because it was really a really good time.
I appreciate that. And I think, so there's 2 things to unpack there. One, I would agree with you. Once you get people to the show and they see like what it's all about, and it's a really good deer camp feel, like-minded people you see and talk to on the internet all the time, fellow people within the industry, and everybody's there. They're all, I call them our people. They want to learn. And there's no it's not an ego thing. There's no this company bashing that company, nothing like that. There's no drama. It's a great environment. But I also equate that to mobile hunting, because I feel like talking to some of these people that don't do it yet, they just don't understand. And it's so funny, because I'll do something stupid in the backyard in a tree and just take a couple video clips and put it in my story, and messages start pouring in. And they're like, wait, what is that? How did you get that? What's that called? And they just can't believe it. And I've argued with these guys. They're like, oh, summit climber till I die or whatever. And I'm like, summit climber killed a lot of deer. Love those climbers. But
One trick pony.
It is how many trees I haven't been able to get in, and I can think of multiple fence rows with those damn pin oaks and everything else where you couldn't get in a tree. You couldn't get in a tree at all. And I could have got up.
Or you're getting in the wrong tree.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Your
better tree could be in this. And really, a lot of my success has come down to being in the exact right tree.
Yeah. Oh.
You got to have the right wind currents. You got, sometimes you're fighting wind and thermals.
Yeah.
You've got, obstacles, shooting lanes, everything else. And in public, you're not out there mowing it down. You're hunting a spot once or twice, maybe slip in there once. It's getting in that perfect tree.
Yes.
And that's where that mobile hunting really comes in handy, whether you use a saddle or you use a stand or whatever you use. Being able to get in whatever tree you need to, where you need to, or even being able to abandon it and get on the ground or whatever you need to do. And there's so many people that only hunt one way, or only
20 feet
way.
Got to be 20 feet up. Got to be 25 feet up. I'm using 19 sticks. Like, dude, every situation's different. So it's very interesting though. And one thing that's super encouraging is we haven't scratched the surface. Like, there's a bunch of people that hunt that don't even know what this is. And there's still people out there that somehow don't know who Andy May and Dan Infalt and all these other, Jake Bush and all these other guys that kill big deer. They have no idea who they are. And then they watch a video at my house or whatever while we're drinking a beer or something. And then a week later, you get a message and they want to know something else. And then all of a sudden it just starts clicking, and they get into it. But it's, no offense to the guy that does want to hunt private land or food plots and go look at a bunch of yearlings and 2-year-olds and does and all that. But if you want to kill big deer, in my experience and everything I've heard from all you guys that have taught the community so much, and how it works on TV just ain't how it's working in real life. That ain't real life. So,
well, there's more than one way to kill a deer.
Yeah.
We do one way. And, I used to look at it in a manner of like other people were uneducated. They didn't, they didn't know what they're doing. They weren't doing it because they didn't understand. But as I've gotten older and I've gotten to know people a little better and I've got a little more understanding and a little less bullheaded and egotistical, I started learning that, people hunt for different reasons.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of my hunts, when I tell you about a hunt, I'm probably not telling you about the 170-inch buck I shot. I'm telling you about what I went through to get it.
Yep.
And the harder it is, the more that buck means to me. And it has a lot less to do with the size of that buck than it does the adventure.
Yep.
And the hardship of hunting. I mean, I really enjoy pushing myself to the extreme. I enjoy, going as far as my body will let me go and seeing if I can get the job done. To some people, hunting is relaxing. It's something to do. It's something to do from life. I mean, they don't want to go out there and work. They're trying to get away from work. Where I work harder hunting, and you do too, than you do at work.
Right.
At your regular business. If they work me like that in the machine shop, I'd quit. I ain't working that hard.
Right. It's kind of funny you say that because I'll invite a buddy or whatever. Okay, what time are we getting up? 2. Enjoy your day, buddy. I don't want anything to do with that. Last year when I hunted Indiana, I was waking up at 2 a.m., making a 2.5, 3-hour drive, then a 50-minute hike just to get there by daylight, and get a few hours of sleep beforehand, and then, hunt and then scout my way through the woods all day until I found what I wanted. But I agree 100%, man. It's one thing, I think probably the biggest eye-opening thing to starting, the whole, whatever you want to call it, YouTube, podcast, platform, whatever, is everybody always asks you where you killed that deer. And it's so rare that you hear people ask how and why you killed the deer. And, I tell them all the time, I'm like, listen, I'm not telling you, but also it wouldn't matter. That would be like casting into a ripple where somebody just pulled a lunker out expecting to also get a 10-pound bass. It's not going to happen that way. You have to go through and learn. And I mean, you can get lucky, but and I think luck plays into it here and there too, but nobody ever really wants to know the why of it. And that, to me, again, I love that the deer's unique and big and all those things, but the way that all came together and being able to break everything down, use, ditches and lakes and rivers and everything that I did to play the wind and everything. And, that's the other thing, which I've heard you talk about, like all these guys that they get like this OCD where they spray stuff all over them and buy clothing or suits or whatever and think they're going to be invisible or not be smelled. And I'm like, dude, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't get winded, but I've killed some pretty nice deer and they have not caught my wind. I'm not going through that regimen. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it doesn't work, but I don't believe that it does. So, but that being said, kind of went on a tangent there. This year we've grown a little more. We've got 3 shows instead of 2. So we've got the Southern show. We moved that to Georgia in a little better building with better access for the vendors. Didn't care for it being like in a big city, and there really wasn't anywhere to park unless you wanted to be in a garage. And I don't want to ask somebody to pull a trailer and then go park in a parking garage. That's stupid. I can't believe they did that. So we're in Dalton, Georgia, June 28th through 30th. And then the Northern show is going to be at Kalamazoo again. I would encourage anybody who wants to camp there. I'm pretty sure our whole expo team, I don't know if I'm going to rent an RV or what we're going to do, but or get a wall tent or whatever. But if I can find something to keep us cool, we'll be camping there because that looked pretty fun. And that'll be July 26th through 28th. And then I would
actually suggest the camping. You certainly don't want to stay at the Red Roof Inn. It comes with a girl. Didn't know that when I booked the room.
You could have had a damn great time, Dan. That girl was a worker. No. So the show we added this year that I'm really excited about is in Mannheim, Pennsylvania. That's Eastern PA, very close to Lancaster. It's actually where they hold the Lancaster Classic for those that pay attention to that stuff. And that's going to be August 9th through 11th. So it's going to be really fun. And one thing that I have to say, if you're listening to this and you own a company, if you can be tied into mobile hunting, cool, come on. But one thing we pride ourselves on, you're not going to get grilled by insurance and gutter people and the jerky people and popcorn people. We don't have filler booths at our show. When you pay $20 to get into the door, you're going to come talk to Dan or guys like Dan or whoever. You're not going to get half of a show. While it would be nice to take those people's money, I want something that's a higher quality, I guess. So please don't be offended like the ladder stand guy was earlier this year. He was not thrilled.
Hey, Chris, before we're going to get into some Q&A here, it's time to do that. But before we get into that, is there a website? You mentioned the dates and stuff, but where can people buy tickets, or where can they find out when they can buy tickets?
Yeah, so we'll be selling tickets at the beginning of the year, and you can just visit themobilehuntersexpo.com, and we'll sell tickets on there. You can also purchase tickets at the door. We'll probably do a pre-sale special where, let's say Dan wants to speak at the Northern show again. I think last year, anybody who used his code got $2 off on top of I forget what it was, but I think it was already so $2 off pre-sale, and then Dan's code got you another $2. So you save $4 or $5 or whatever it was. And then we have a business page on Facebook and Instagram as well, where we post all the guest speaker announcements and, the vendors, and any information on the show can be found on our website, themobilehuntersexpo.com, or if you just type in the Mobile Hunters Expo on Facebook or Instagram, you can find them there. And then we also actually have sort of like a rounding off platform, if you will, a YouTube channel and podcast called The Mobile Hunter that will do videos on different gear and stuff that's going to be at the shows and different things, and just any kind of information pertaining to mobile hunting, basically. We also have a Facebook group called The Mobile Hunter as well. So super unbiased. It's not any one brand or anything like that. It's all things mobile hunting.
Awesome. Sounds like a great show. I'm going to try to make it out to the Michigan one this year. I'm from Michigan originally. I live in Montana, but might be a good reason to get home around that time. So
there you go.
Like fun. Sounds like fun. All right. Well, let's get into some questions here. Ron E says, what are your thoughts on using scent drippers to daylight nocturnal bucks over a mock scrape? So either one of you have any experience using drippers?
I'll let Dan go first.
Okay.
For me, I would rather not use anything like that, but if I did, it would be just with a camera to get inventory. But I would probably personally, I'd just put it over a scrape or a trail or a feeding area or something. But I certainly don't do that in areas that I hunt. That gets into that whole thing again where I said, whenever I shoot a mature buck, it's where people don't go, where they haven't been molested, where they haven't ran into cameras, where they haven't ran into people, So I'm hunting a class of animals that doesn't put up with that kind of stuff. Yep. You can kill good bucks doing that, but it's just that hasn't worked for me in pressured areas. I've seen it work for people pretty well on private land, so I'm sure it can work on public that's not very pressured too. But I think I would say if it doesn't work well in heavy pressure, there's probably even good bucks on lightly pressured stuff that wouldn't come near it too.
Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are, Dan, but I don't know that you're necessarily going to get these nocturnal deer to daylight over P. They're just going to come in and find that doe after dark and scent trailer. But one of the methods that I was going to try to use this year was to hang a dripper over a scrape that I planned to hunt like the day before. Basically feeling strongly that deer would not be in there. And so that way, all night long, that scent has dripped in there. I show up and I don't have to walk over there or something. I'm really weird with ground scent. So that would be the only thing.
That's the
That-
biggest thing. When you place that stuff, you get ground scent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're
So
educating
for
them.
me,
So,
my whole aspect of hunting, and wrong or right, I'm not saying anybody else should do what I do, but for me, I think it's been best for me to catch mature bucks by sheer and utter surprise. That they have no idea I've ever been there or ever going to go there. They've never smelt me in the area. They don't know what's going on. They just walk into a trap.
yep.
I have more of a likelihood of killing them things. I think as soon as you start adding trickery or, trying to dupe them is where you start getting issues. You start getting deer that drop strings and, are looking for trouble, looking in
Yep.
trees, coming in right on the edge of darkness. That's just me, but that's been my experience with it.
I agree.
Well, we got another one. Dan Douglas D says YouTube may not like Mr. Dan's hat. They do not like pictures or videos with extended magazines. Mr. Douglas, I want to correct you. That's a standard magazine. That's not an extended magazine. And he says that's ridiculous. What are your thoughts on these shenanigans? So I guess overall,
Yeah,
maybe just YouTube
they
and
sent me a
censorship.
message and told me I can't show an AR with more than 5 rounds in the magazine. I'm not even too sure I can use that word. Maybe I better call it mag. They'll flag it, or I don't know. They're pretty nuts with that stuff. They got their own sets of rules. It's crazy because I've got rules too that I can't show blood on the channel. And if you show a deer with blood on it or whatever, they'll demonetize the video. If you do enough of it, they'll turn your show off for a while. They'll give you a punishment. But yet certain channels that have a larger audience are allowed to, like Meat Hunter. They show it right in their front of their video. Because of their size, YouTube leaves them alone.
I assume you meant Meat Eater, not Meat Hunter.
Meat Eater, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Meat Hunter.
No, that's fine. I'm just clarifying.
I'm sure there's one that exists under that name because there's every name is used.
Philip the Wise asked, Dan, have you ever had any physical confrontations while hunting public land?
No, that's probably a good question for both of us. We should probably look for questions that fit both of us. But physical confrontations, I've had some people get upset with me, of course. I mean, public land is kind of that way where you're going to run into some people. Everybody uses it. I've had people get mad about all kinds of things. They think you're hunting their area. I haven't gotten in any fights or anything. I mean, I just walk away from stupid people. I mean, life's too short to die over something stupid like a deer.
Right.
People got weapons. I mean, you walk away from people like that. But that said, I do carry a sidearm when I hunt. I have concealed carry and I carry a weapon, and it certainly isn't for attacking bears and wolves. The most dangerous animal out there is a human. And really what you can do is just keep in mind that it's not about being macho or tough or being right. It's about living another day. When somebody starts a confrontation with you, you walk away. You tell them, sorry, didn't mean nothing. Bye. You walk away. That's the best way to handle all of that.
I had a lady accuse me of trespassing while sitting on public land. And then she tried to she was like, oh, well, you're not trespassing now. I got you on camera over here on our land. I'm like, ma'am, that's where I'm expecting a deer to come from. I'm not going to walk over to your property to get to here. Are you crazy? So she threatened to call the game warden and everything. I was like, call him. I'll wait right here. And then she just disappeared. So I actually ended up calling the game warden and letting him know, like, hey, I had some psycho lady yelling at me in my tree stand today. So if you get a call, I can show you right where I was. I recorded my track all the way out. I was like, yeah, you're not. And she was like a Karen. So
the biggest harassment I ever got was from a cop.
Really?
Yeah. I used to guide probably about 25 years ago. I had some clients from New York, and I actually knew them through my work. So it was a little bit like kind of like friends that know each other through business getting together, but they paid for a hunt. and they came out, and we went to a spot to hunt, and it was earn a buck, and they kept insisting that I hunt, and because I normally won't hunt, or when I was a guide, I wouldn't hunt when I had clients, but these guys were kind of like friends, and I had like these two guys, and I had 3 spots, and I said, well, you guys pick first, and I'll take the last spot, and I took a spot by the road, and they went out hunting, and I ended up shooting a doe, and I had a cameraman who isn't a hunter, just a camera guy. And when I shot this doe, it ran over and laid down, but I knew that my shot was a little back, so we didn't go right over there. And I come out, and there's a cop there with his lights on, and he's got the 2 guys from New York up against his car, and he's interrogating them. And I come over there, and I says, "What's up?" And right away he says, "Oh, it's the big shot hunter, or big shot guide." He says, right? He says, "Can I see your guide's license?" It's in my wallet. I couldn't find it. I don't know what I did with it. It was missing. So I can't find it. I got one. The warden knows me, and he knows I got one. And he says, well, you have to have it on you. And then he goes, "Did anybody shoot a deer?" And I'm like, I didn't want to answer him because I knew where that was going to go. So I was like, "What are you, a warden?" And then he got really mad. I said, "You're a cop." And he's like, I says, "Yeah, I shot a deer." And he goes, "Where is it?" I says, "Well, you gotta go track it." He goes, "Did you see it go down?" And the stupid cameraman I had goes, "Oh yeah, we saw it go down." And I knew what that was about, because if you see a deer go down, you have to take it immediately according to Wisconsin laws. So I said, wait. I says, the shot was a little back. I didn't want to rush right up to it, which is perfectly fine. You don't have to rush right up to it. We didn't go up to it, so it didn't have to be tagged. So he insists on going out there with me to see where I shot this deer, which isn't his job, basically. So we go out there, and he says he's going to have me cited for not taking a deer immediately. And I mean, and he starts giving me this lecture about how you can't guide people on public land. That's illegal. I'm going to get cited for that, which is not illegal. It's not at all. So he doesn't even know all of his laws. And he says, "You fooled these people into thinking they're going on some guided hunt on private." No, I told them they're on public land, So he, anyways, he tells me I'm getting all these citations, and I tag this deer, and we had these paper tags, and I dragged this deer out, and I get it to the side of the road, and the cop's still there interrogating those guys, and I look, and the tag's missing. And it's dark out now, and I go back, and I'm looking for this tag. I can't find it. I'm looking all over the place. I'm like, oh man. So then I don't want him to see me looking around when I don't know where the tag is. And I went over and got my truck and those guys. I went over and picked up this deer and took it back to my house. And then the tags were free. You could go down and get them. It was a CWD thing. So I went down and got another tag, came back and tagged it. And I thought there was a date thing with it, So I was like, all right, enough's enough. I'm going to get myself in trouble here. So I called the warden up, and I just told him everything, just like I just told you. And he listened to me, and I told him, he said, "I'm getting a ticket for this stuff and stuff." And I said, "You've stopped me. You see my license, all that crap." And the warden said, "Dan, calm down. That sheriff has been harassing everybody on that property because he hunts on that property. And this is the straw that broke the camel's back. He's getting hunter harassment."
Wow.
He charged the sheriff with hunter's harassment for harassing me. But,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Must be a sheriff.
Next time I saw that sheriff was about a week later, and he drove past me, spun around, put his lights on, and came up to me and just started screaming at me that I had a crack in my windshield. "You're going to have that replaced within a week," and threw the ticket at me. And I just said, "Thank you." Wow. Replaced the windshield. That was the last time I ever saw him. But yeah.
I was going to say, must be a sheriff thing, Dan. There was a sheriff in Montana this year that got cited because in Montana, you only get 1 buck tag, and then he shot a whitetail buck, and then he used his wife's tag to tag a mule deer and got caught somehow. So it was,
I don't want to knock police because
yeah.
I love cops. I've got a bunch of friends that are cops, but there's bad people in everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Every aspect of life,
Yep.
Well, guys, we're running up on an hour 25. Let's do one more question just to make it an even hour and a half. Chris Ott asked, have you guys have any luck with late season morning hunts? If so, how do you hunt them? So Chris, why don't you go first? Any late season morning hunts? And if so, what are you doing?
So I'm gonna my buddy is probably salivating because I used to hunt private land, therefore morning hunts really weren't my thing until you got to the rut and everything, and then after that I really didn't do it a whole lot. But I believe that just like you find those little overlooked pockets, um, deer are kind of conditioned to when and where people move, and I think when means just as much as where. And so I think the majority of people stop hunting in the mornings, especially when it's super cold and all you can do is take your loud, creaky bow out there. So I think a morning hunt is a solid idea if you have the right situation. Uh, to me, the right situation is going to be bedding hands down, um, which I mean, I think that could go either way, morning or evening. I don't know that I necessarily want to sit on top of food because it's going to take him longer to get there and you're going to deal with more eyes and noses. So my advice would be to go figure out where he's bedding and try to catch him coming in. You might surprise yourself with how much you surprise him, but I'm not going to lie, that's a tough feat with way less cover, more pressured. You know, they're the most pressured that they'll be all year, basically. It's cold. It's a tough hunt.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I do have some situations where a morning hunt would be a pretty good idea for late season. But the biggest problem with it is most of the areas I hunt at this time of the year, the deer are getting pretty remote out in cattails and stuff, and you'd have to take deer trails to get out there. So the deer are kind of taking the same trail you did, and the whole scent problem. So most of them I have to kayak or canoe to, and I have to get there a couple hours before daylight. So I mean, you're talking getting up pretty early, going on some pretty frigid weather up here in the north, and sitting. And the deer usually come in, they'll bed in a couple places and move around, and you kind of got to wait till they come to you. The good part is you'll know they're in the area. You'll hear them moving, you'll see them, but you got to get them to go to the exact right tree. Sometimes you got to wait a long time. I do much better in the evenings, but there is one or two spots where I cannot get near them unless I go in the morning, just because where they're bedding to get to them, you got to chase them out of there. But even to go in the morning, you have to go from a very hard access. But it is doable. The other problem is this time of the year, they're pretty nocturnal in the mornings. They get there pretty early before daylight a lot. So if you got a locked down bedding area and you could hunt an evening or morning, I would certainly hunt an evening over morning because they're more predictable to move in daylight in the evening. But it is doable.
Yeah. I think probably the situation that comes to mind, if you got like good food up top, ag, chestnut oak flat, whatever in hill country, you could maybe catch him coming down to bed. But again, good luck playing the thermals during that time of year and everything. But also, like Dan said, they're going to get there super early because they're out all night trying to keep warm and feeding to make it through that next day. And then, evening's going to be your best time. But I know not everybody has that, ability to go out in the evening. Some people work second shift.
Yep.
All right. I want to thank Chris for coming on the show today. Appreciate it, Chris. And I'm sure
Thank you.
Dan,
Thanks,
glad
Chris.
to have you.
Thank
To have
you.
you too. One more shout out to Mobile Hunters Expo and the shows if people are interested in that. I haven't been to one yet, but it sounds like a great time. So you can check out all the resources Chris mentioned or come to a show this summer. And we'll be back here next week at the same time. I think, right, Dan? We don't have anything going on. So we'll be back here next week, 7 Central, and look forward to catching everyone then.
Thanks, guys.
All right, see ya.
All right. Thanks, everybody.